Well, thank you very much for inviting me to be interviewed. My interest in international law first sparked at university when I studied PIL as an undergraduate. And I've always been very interested in the space in which law and politics collide, particularly international politics and international relations. So it seemed like a good career to pursue, to be able to make a contribution to that, and also to be at the centre of policy making, law making. I'm also very interested in human rights and the relationship between law and legitimacy. So how can international law, which isn't structured in the same way as domestic law and has various challenges, how can it still constrain realpolitik to further human rights, or just to help make a contribution to the maintenance of the rule of law and ensure that, to the extent that it can, there is some equality, at least some juridical equality, as between states and how they function in the international arena. At the time when I was first studying international law, and then a few years on, the Iraq War loomed large, so that was a hot topic of societal debate, and I remember being quite intrigued and wanting to explore the arguments for and against myself, which I managed to do when I went to LSE as an LLM student. Also, the Human Rights Act had recently come into force just as I left university, and I've always been very committed to human rights and had also very broad interest in the United Nations and diplomacy. So again, naturally, all of those interests seem to come together in the international legal field. When I graduated from university, I went to bar school and qualified as a barrister. So I was a media barrister for 4 years. I worked at my chambers, but also a number of media outlets. I then went to LSE to do my LLM in public international law, and I was a research assistant for Sir Franklin Berman and Christine Chinkin at the same time. I then went to the European Commission for 6 months, working in DG External Relations in Human Rights and Democratisation, and then I joined the Foreign Office. I've been here for about 8 years, and I've switched between legal and policy roles during my time here. These have included UN Policy Officer in the Ebola Task Force for the United Kingdom, and also my role as Head of Human Rights, Conflict Prevention and Peacekeeping at the UK mission to the United Nations. I've worked on a number of different legal portfolios at the Foreign Office as well, including the Syria-Libya crises, human rights, peacekeeping from a legal perspective, and many other sort of thematic and geographical areas. I've also served as a teaching fellow at SOAS, so I've dotted myself around. Foreign Office Legal Directorate is split into different teams. So whilst we do a lot of international law, we advise on a lot of domestic and EU and constitutional issues as well. Essentially, we have to advise geographic and thematic departments within the Foreign Office, for example, Africa Directorate or International Institutions Directorate, on any legal issue that arises in their daily work, and help ensure that policy as it develops and policy recommendations which are made to ministers comply with the law writ large, including critically international law. And I think it was my interest I mentioned earlier about the sort of parameters between law and politics. And as a student, I very much enjoyed Koskiniemi's work and critiques of where the balance lay, whether international law actually existed as a discipline or reality at all, or whether we're all making it up. And I've never bought that argument, but nor do I think that international law is the same beast as domestic law. I very much think that Rosalind Higgins' conception of law as process is very much how I would describe international law as well. I think that my master's and my research work served me really well as a very busy government lawyer because there's a lot of firefighting and quickfire work that goes on at the Foreign Office and across government more broadly. And I think coming to the role with that in-depth, rich knowledge of international law, and also being a practitioner at the bar with litigation experience, I think it equipped me really well to help with the firefighting and the delivery of quick, accurate, policy-relevant advice. I think probably the one you just mentioned, which is transition. I think transition and deciding that the role you're currently doing isn't one for you, and making that move is difficult. I think it's a very difficult decision, and I gave up my tenancy at Fantastic Chambers, so that wasn't a decision that I took lightly, but I also did it with some trepidation because I was sort of launching myself into the unknown, from having a tenancy to going back to study, and I didn't know when my next job would be or where it would be. I think that felt quite scary at the time, but it was definitely a risk worth running. And whilst I was studying at LSE, I continued to work as a libel lawyer, so that was quite a busy year for me as well. So that was, I guess that was part of the challenge and that transitional point. I think a couple spring to mind. Firstly, when I was head of peacekeeping and conflict prevention and human rights at the UK mission to the UN, so serving as a British diplomat, I marshalled through the Security Council a resolution on human rights and conflict prevention, Resolution 2171, which is quite a seminal text and contribution to this field, making that linkage between early warning and human rights. And the Secretary General attended the open debate that I organised and made a very powerful speech alongside Navi Pillai, the outgoing Commissioner for Human Rights. So I felt that was a real career high point for me. I very much enjoyed negotiating the text and making a contribution to a field that I really believe in. I think another high moment was working on the UK's statements for the Kosovo advisory proceedings and working alongside James Crawford and Daniel Bethlehem on those, who are very eminent and brilliant lawyers in the international law field. So that was a real privilege. Also witnessing lots of other states make their pleas for and against to the International Court of Justice was a really exciting and interesting moment. I don't think that being a woman in the international legal field is a disadvantage at all. I think in terms of women entering the legal profession, it's, I think, more women than men do these days. But I think there probably are potential blockages, not necessarily in the international legal field, but just some visible, invisible barriers more broadly in terms of career progression, which some international lawyers, such as Anne-Marie Slaughter, have written about. So I don't think that's exclusive to my profession or field, but I think it's a broader issue that society still needs to grapple with. I think also I've been very lucky to have strong female role models in the international legal field who I've learnt a lot from and very impressed by, such as Professor Christine Chenkin, a couple of people at the Foreign Office who I didn't work with but were here and made significant contributions, such as Eileen Denzer, who wrote a key textbook on diplomatic law, and also Rosalind Higgins. I think she paved the way for international female lawyers at the ICJ and also in academia. I think the advice I would give would be to try as many fields and do as many internships as possible to work out which area you want to start in or move to. I think there's a very rich range of options out there, and I don't think you need to settle upon one. You can dip in and out of different areas. I think that your university is important. Choose a university which has got very excellent people at, because they can be influential over your career, and I think working alongside them can be very inspiring as well. And I also don't think this is exclusive to international law, but I think resilience is important as well. I very much enjoyed the CV of failures, which a professor at Princeton recently published, which showed the jobs that he hadn't got as well as those that he did. And I think if you look at his actual CV, it's as impressive, if not more so, than the failed CV. So I think keeping going and having confidence is important as well. I touched upon the work of Anne-Marie Slaughter earlier, who wrote the seminal article in The Atlantic, Can Women Have It All?, and her follow-up book, which I possess but have not yet read. And I think actually it's this mid-career point which is very challenging for women as they have families, as they assume caring responsibilities. I think there are still challenges surrounding equal division of labour across the genders. And again, I don't think it's exclusive to international law, but it will impact on you should you decide to have a busy career as an international lawyer. Well, I think that going back somewhat, Eleanor Roosevelt made a huge contribution to international law, in particular international human rights law, given her role in overseeing the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, representing the US in the General Assembly in New York, and also encouraging the US to be part of the United Nations. So I think she has done much for the human rights field, but also by being such a strong vocal proponent for women's equality. She has made a significant contribution. More recently, I think the work of Christine Chinkin and Hilary Charlesworth, feminist critiques and analyses of international law, has been highly significant as well. I mentioned earlier Problems and Processes, the book which Rosalind Higgins wrote before she went to the ICJ, and just being the first woman in your field to be a judge at the ICJ is an enormous achievement, and I hope that the composition of the court will become even more equal in years to come.